Coming up on today's episode of the Money Pants Superpower Hour. There is a lot of advice out there. Everyone has an opinion, especially when it comes to raising kids and running the home. A simple internet search will reveal thousands of articles about how to be a good parent. But what do you do when it's not right? Often, one blogger's advice will conflict with another blogger's advice. How can you tell what advice is legit and what is just fluff? Today, we're going to talk about why you should try to cut through any unnecessary fluff. We'll share 4 easy tests to help determine whether the advice you're being given will be of value or whether it's just nonsense. Plus, we'll apply these 4 easy tests to some actual advice from books. All this and more, but first, the joke of the day.
A man finds a bottle on the ground and wipes it off when suddenly a genie appears in a puff of smoke. The genie says, "Because you freed me from my prison, I can offer you a gift. You can be the most handsome man in the world, have infinite wealth or limitless wisdom." The man thinks for a second and says, "I'll take the wisdom." "Wisdom is yours," says the genie as he disappears in another puff. The smoke is barely clear before the man thinks, "I should have taken the money." Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning into another episode of the Money Pants Superpower Hour. We're your hosts, Hannah and Fontaine Judd, and we're the proud parents of 8 sons and 7 daughters, ranging in age from newborn to college student. We're both BYU graduates and the creators of Money Pants. Head on over to CaptainMoneyPants.com to learn more about what we do and what we're all about. We believe every person on this planet has been given at least one superpower to help them accomplish their unique mission in life. But the only way to unlock those superpowers is through work ethic. That's when greatness happens. And that's where Money Pants comes in. Money Pants is the complete tool set for cultivating work ethic in all aspects of a person's life. In today's topic, we're going to be talking about practical help for parents when it comes to running the home and raising kids and all that versus fluffy advice, where there's a lot of advice out there that it just is simply not helpful, not true, and kind of annoying, quite frankly. And so we kind of want to wrap it up, end this thing with the idea of how to detect the nonsense. Like, we're going to give some tools, 4 ideas on ways to detect nonsense so that you don't have to go through and make the mistake before realizing, oh yeah, what they told me was wrong. And it kind of reminded me of my high school teacher. I had he was so good. My high school physics teacher, Mr. Keith, was really good at explaining complicated principles, but making them simple and helping you remember them and helping you apply them in a practical way. God, he was just so good. But he had a funny thing. He would bring up other people's ideas that were wrong, and to try to test us, to see if we could detect, what was right and what was wrong. And he had this little device that he had created, and he called it his BS detector. And he would present some incorrect principle or idea in the physics world and some sort of nonsense that someone had heard or someone had brought up. And he'd be like, "Oh, the BS detector's going," and the little wires would spin. And it was great because he kind of made light of it. But the idea I thought was great was, wouldn't it be wonderful if there was such a thing as a BS detector that could pinpoint, oh, no, that's just not true, or that's a bunch of hooey, or that's hogwash, where it would just be so, not just in the physics world, but in life in general. And by the way, total sidebar, but BS, the letters BS stand for bologna sandwich. When somebody's full of bologna, that's what it means, is that they're full of a bologna sandwich. That's just a bunch of bologna. And so to have a BS detector sure would be convenient. And I guess we're going to kind of talk about that a little bit today, later on. But before we get into that, Hannah, you had a couple of experiences where you were presented with, I guess, BS, and and it was kind of frustrating. I'll get the first one was with the scout leader, right?
Yeah. One time I had my oldest son was 12 or 13, and I wanted him to get his Eagle Scout, and I wanted to try to be supportive to him. And so I showed up to this introductory meeting for parents, and the person in charge is a very friendly guy, and he loved to talk, but he had a knack about when he would explain things and processes where he would make it sound way more complicated than what it was. And so I was sitting there and I was ready to go, and I had my pencil out and ready to write down what I needed to do. And 20 minutes into it, 30 minutes into it, I just put my pencil down. I was so overwhelmed, where he was just like, and then you got to do this and this, but only on Wednesdays and here, and then go there, but don't forget to do this and that and that. And it was just like all this stuff. And I'm like, I can't do this. I don't have time to do this. I'm so confused. And so instead of it encouraging me to go, hey, I can do this and I'm going to get right to work, instead I went home and did nothing.
And cried.
And was like, I don't know if I want to do Scouts. I don't want to.
It was too complicated. It was overwhelming and complicated.
I have no idea what I just listened to for the last 2 hours.
And I know
how to apply it, how to do it. And so for a lot of times when I will pick up books on advice for parents and how to do things, sometimes I'll pick up a book and it's like so practical and like, wow, these are great ideas. I can do that.
Well, no, I thought the Duggars had some really good stuff in their book.
Yeah.
But those are kind of few. Those are few and far between.
That's a fantastic idea, and and it's something where I'm like, oh, I can do that, and it's encouraging, and then you feel like encouraged. Whereas other times you read a book and you're like, wow, I'm a bad parent. And sometimes when I read other people's advice, not only does it make me feel bad about myself and inadequate, but I start going, I'm not doing that and I can't do that. And it actually discourages me instead of helping me. But then on top of that, sometimes the advice people give, it's very questionable.
So this scout leader, unfortunately, just because he overcomplicated the situation and the instructions and what you needed to do, you not only did it not inspire you, but it actually kind of took the wind out of your sails and took away all the motivation to actually do what you had set out to do. And so that was no bueno. And unfortunately, Hannah, a lot of what he told you, because I know who you're talking about, a lot of what he told you was unnecessary, and it was just extra busy work. And he had made it, not only did he make it seem more complicated, he actually made it more complicated. And I think everybody knows somebody like that. People that like to make things more complicated than they need to be. I don't know what the motivation is there, why they do it, but I know I can think of multiple people in my life that throughout the years where I'm like, why are you making it so complicated? Just simplify, make it easy. So, but then I guess that leads into the second story, because we have these 3 stories. We got the first one's about the scout leader. The next one's about a good friend of ours who was attending a class, a training. And then the third one is about a bathroom
poster.
A bathroom poster. So go ahead about the...
So the next story is a good friend of mine got all riled up because she was a teacher at church. And the teachers were all invited to this training meeting on a weekend, and the man teaching the class had a PhD and all these degrees and stuff, and he was this young guy, not married, didn't have kids, and his whole speech to them was, you should never, ever, ever, ever tell a child no.
What?
Yeah, ever. And
wait. That was his thing. Under any circumstances, you're never supposed to tell a child no.
Yeah, that they were bad teachers if they were ever telling a child no, and that it was going to destroy the child's self-esteem. And because they told the child no, the child would think that they were bad, and then therefore the child would become bad because the teacher told them no.
What?
Yeah, and you're laughing, but for some reason,
sorry, I just stepped in a giant BS sandwich.
Yeah, that little detector is going off. And so my friend's detector was going off, and she raised her hand and she goes, you mean usually you should avoid telling them no, but surely there are some instances you should tell the child no, right?
Yeah, yes.
And he goes, no, there is never a time when it's appropriate to tell a child no. And she goes, well, wait a minute. What about if, I have these kids? What if one kid is hitting or smacking another kid, I have to stop that. I have to tell them, no, I can't just like go, oh,
Yeah, you have a lawsuit on your hands, lady.
The parents are going to be upset. How's that fair to the kid that's getting hit and hurt by the other kid? I need to tell them that that's not appropriate behavior and to stop. And he's like, no, you should not do that. And which was funny because he was telling her no, but that aside, that aside, apparently adults and children are different. You can tell adults no, but not the children. Anyway, and he goes, no, you don't tell him that what he's doing is wrong. Instead, you bring him up to the front of the class and you start complimenting him. And tell him what a wonderful person he is and everything good, and have everyone in the class compliment him. And then he will stop doing what he's doing. And my friend said, well, what if he doesn't? Well, then you didn't do it enough. And she was getting so irritated.
Because it's a bunch of bologna sandwich.
Yeah, but guess what? This is an actual thing. And so I was talking to another friend of mine.
I wish I had been there. There's no way I would have put up with that.
You would have.
Sorry, man. You're full of baloney. This is no. Are you? And then, of course, that begs the question. Okay, so if you're never supposed to tell a child no, but you can tell adults no, when is a child an adult? Like when they turn 18?
Like all of a sudden you're 18 and they hear the word no for the first time. It's hilarious.
What a absurd concept.
But anyway,
that is, Hannah. That is so absurd to me. Like if the kid's going, hey, Mom, Dad, I want to go and drink this alcohol. Well, I can't tell you no. Okay, so I'm going to have a drunk 5-year-old or worse, Mom and Dad, I'm going to drink this bleach. Well, I can't tell you no.
I love you and your hair looks so cute today and you're so kind.
And we're
kind of beating around the bush. No, you shouldn't drink that bleach. It'll kill you.
And we haven't talked about manipulation, but that is textbook manipulation, to being indirect in what you want, instead of telling the kid, I don't want you to hit Johnny, and Johnny doesn't want you to hit him either. You need to stop. I want you to stop. Johnny wants you to stop. Please stop. No, you can't do that. Instead of saying that, you're like, oh, we love you. Let's give you a hug. Like that is textbook manipulation, being indirect and trying to manipulate someone into doing something you want without actually saying what it is that you want.
Well, in our previous podcast,
that guy drives me crazy.
I know, about training yourself to train your children. We kind of addressed that, where Brandon McMillan, where he was teaching dog training, you give him a quick no, and then you redirect them to what they should be doing.
I love the redirect principle.
And that's correct.
Yeah.
Whenever you give your kid a reprimand, instead of dwelling on the no, then you focus their attention onto what to do instead of what not to do.
Yeah.
And that's correct.
But that's a correct. Okay, so we do that with the toddlers. We do that all the time because toddlers get no a lot, Hannah. They get told no a ton because they don't know what's right and wrong, and so all they get is no. No, don't do this. Don't touch that. Don't throw that. Don't put that there. Instead, we should be like, okay, don't leave your bowl on the floor. Go ahead and put it up here on the counter.
Put it here. Put the bowl
here.
And
they actually like that, knowing what to do.
Go play in the backyard.
Oh God, that PhD guy.
Yeah. So
ruffles my feathers.
Yeah, but anyway, people have taken that idea. Apparently, it's this real theory. And a friend of mine said her daughter was teaching in private school, and they were being instructed that at this school you're not allowed telling a child that they're wrong.
What?
And so when they grade the papers, they're not allowed marking that any of their work is wrong.
What?
Yeah.
So 2 + 2 does not equal 5. Oh, I can't say that.
They can show them how to do things, but they're not allowed saying, oh, you missed that problem.
What?
And so,
because it'll hurt their feelings.
Because it'll destroy their self-esteem.
And turn them into serial killers, right?
So
that's the logic.
So instead, they're going to give the kids this false sense of, I know how to do this. I know how to do math. And I'm
going to give them all sorts of false ideas, Hannah, not just false sense of math.
Yeah, like I think I would be, to me, that's the equivalent of me having a dinner all night and having spinach between my teeth and nobody in my family telling me, hey, there's some spinach between your teeth. Pull it out. I would be embarrassed and like, why didn't anybody tell me that I had spinach hanging out of my teeth?
Well, no, but let's just take it a step.
It's not you do it discreetly. Don't try to embarrass me, but for goodness sake, just tell me that something's wrong.
But there are real world consequences, Hannah. Like, oh, well, I drove my car off the cliff, but I didn't know that gravity existed. And I don't think that gravity does exist. Therefore, the car actually I won't fall to my death. Like, because nobody ever explained that to me, and nobody ever told me that was wrong. Like, it's just kind of nonsense.
Yeah.
Where 2 plus 2 does not equal 5. That actually is wrong. Driving your car over the railing, gravity will not just go, oh, well, you didn't know, or you didn't understand, or it's okay. No, gravity. There are all sorts of real world applications happen.
Anyway, the idea is that you can build a child's self-esteem by never telling them no, but there's no consideration as to what the other ramifications of that are.
No. So that was the whole concept, is that if you tell them no, you're going to be damaging their self-esteem. We talked about that. That is not true at all. 0% true. Kids do not gain self-esteem because of what they're told. You get self-esteem and self-worth by making correct decisions. Remember, we talked about that.
By doing what you know is right.
It has nothing to do with external forces. This is just absolute nonsense and gobbledygook.
Yeah. Anyway, so that was that experience of my friend, and she was pretty riled up about it. But this is a real thing, and these are real types of theories that you'll have maybe shoved onto you, where you're like, oh really?
We're gonna cover some here in a minute.
So, but the next story was about a poster in a bathroom. It was somebody's house that I went to a lot, and I would use this guest bathroom. And inside the bathroom there was this poster, and on this poster it was very decorative. It had all sorts of positive sayings. And I'm sitting there and I'm like reading the poster and everything that it said, and all these little bits of advice and feel-good statements. And then I kind of got to halfway through, and there was a statement that the advice was, when somebody gives you a hug, never be the first one to let go. And I'm like, oh, okay. All right, so I need to make sure when I give people a hug, I let them let go first. And then the next time I hugged the person who owned that house and owned that poster, I realized that person wasn't going to let go. And if I followed the same advice, we were going to just stay there hugging indefinitely. So I volunteered.
The indefinite hug.
So I volunteered to end the hug and be the loser, I guess. but anyway, I when I realized that maybe that wasn't the best piece of advice, like that doesn't actually work if both people read the poster, I thought, wait, how many of these other nice little sayings, if you actually go and apply them, don't actually work or aren't actually good pieces of advice. And so all of a sudden, I started paying attention more to little truisms and little pieces of advice, and realizing that a lot of times you'll read books that are self-help books or
advice columns,
advice books on how to run your life.
Oh, it's everywhere.
And you have to look at it with a little bit of a critical thinking skills. You can't just go, wow, other people, this is what I should do. You need to analyze it.
It may even sound right. Like at the get-go, you're like, oh, yeah, I like that. That sounds good. Or
when you hug a person, didn't you call that
ear ticklers, where you hear something that sounds good or sounds nice, you're like, oh, yeah, I like that.
Yeah, but are the truisms actually true?
Yeah.
And that's
sayings.
Are these little sayings actually true? And that's the thing that you have to analyze before you adopt it. And sometimes you'll hear stuff like that, you'll adopt it without even questioning it, without even
because you get inundated and you don't have time to think all these things through, especially when you're a new parent and you don't have the experience of raising children, and you get inundated with all this information. You get blogs and groups and young moms and your aunts and your uncles and grandmas, like all these and people at church or at your social group, everyone's got advice. When you have kids, everybody knows how you should raise your children. And you get inundated and you're like, you don't have time or the energy or even the way to determine.
To filter through all of it.
And a lot of it does. It lodges in the back of your brain. And until you bring it out and examine it, it's part of your psyche and it's part of your style. And you have to figure out. So today's goal is to kind of go, let's take some of those ideas and expose them for what they are, but also give some tools on how to avoid falling into the trap of little niceties and sayings that really are of no value, and how to detect the nonsense. So, and here we go. The 4 principles, Hannah. 4 principles. Here they are. Number 1, first off, look at the person who's giving the advice and figure out if they're even qualified to be giving it. That's number 1. Number 2, this one's going to sound funny, but it'll make sense when we talk about it. Number 2 is take things to the extreme. Take that advice to an extreme and see if it holds up. Number 3, question, is the advice or the saying or whatever it is, or the teaching, is it doable with more than just 1 or 2 children? Does it apply to multiple personality types and age ranges and what have you? And then number 4 is the question you need to ask is, can you apply it at all in a practical setting? If it's not practical, then
what value is it?
Does it have any value? So let's talk about those. Number 1, look at to detect whether or not something is nonsense, the first thing to do is to look at the person who's giving the advice and determine if they're even qualified. I like to think of this as checking the messenger. See if the messenger is, if the message and the messenger are valid.
Yeah, and I noticed this once. I had been given, I had checked out some books or got some books. I was expecting twins, and overwhelming. I wanted to get more information, and so I started reading this one book. And as I was reading it, I'm like, wait a minute, who is this person writing this book? And I realized that the person writing the book was writing the book because they had a child. And
wait, they wrote a book about twins because they had a kid?
They had a set of twins.
Oh, they had a set of twins.
But the book was all about how to be a parent and how to raise your children.
Okay.
And all this advice. And I'm like,
well, it sounds like they're qualified.
They wrote this book when their twins were like 1 year old.
Oh.
And the person was a doctor. But then I realized this mom was a doctor and she worked full time. So she wasn't actually even the one taking care of her twins. She wasn't the one home with her twins actually taking care of them. And she was at work, but she was telling me what I should be doing to take care of. And nor had she actually like raised her children or gone through problems yet, because if you've been a parent, you'll know that you're going to run into problems. Your kids are going to have health problems. You're going to have maybe social problems. Things are going to happen that are out of your control. And you have to go through some of those experiences in order to sometimes shed the nonsense a little.
Well, that's why grandparents are supposed to be this wealth of knowledge. You're supposed to be able to go to grandma and grandpa and say, hey, my daughter's not sleeping through the night, or hey, my teenager's having this problem, or hey, my 12-year-old, he's got the worst breath, or you can go to grandma and grandpa and get their feedback and go, oh well, I know.
That's usually the best source, honestly. Yeah. Like if I go to my
mom,
I'm like,
because they have so much knowledge, they've gone through it and they have all this experience. But but along those same lines, Hannah, where we've noticed that a lot of these blogs, especially the ones that cater towards parents, are written by parents of toddlers, where what could they possibly know? Like, you have not raised children. You gave birth to children. You have children, but that is not the same as raising children.
A lot happens between
the ages of 1 and 18. And I would just put this out there that a whole lot happens between the ages of about 8 and 18. And even more happens between the ages of about 12 and 18. Like, it gets exponentially more complicated the older the kids get and the closer they get to leaving home. And here you are with your 1 year of knowledge spouting all this nonsense where you're like, you don't know anything.
Yeah, well, and a lot of it, like I said, in these blogs, they'll promote theories like you should never tell your child no. And you're like, you haven't been a parent long enough to know how that's going to work out.
Yeah, you haven't seen that to the end. You haven't seen the logical extension of that thought process. And I can tell you right now, you don't have to, because it doesn't work. I know, because we've already tried that. It doesn't work.
But, or you have one kid, or somebody else is raising your kid and they are telling your kid no. Like, there were just so many problems with that. But similar to the man who was teaching the class that I mentioned, saying, you know,
the PhD guy,
or the two PhD he guy. Had this theory that he was spouting out as fact, but to my friend's point, he didn't even have kids.
Like what?
He'd never tried this out to see how it would work and how, you know, what the results.
So a lot of book learning, but no practical experience.
No, actually, yeah.
And what was it called in the lab? No scientific proof from the lab. What's that called?
Yeah.
Where we actually carry out the experiment? Like,
they're just ideas and theories.
But they're promoting them, Hannah, as if this is the gospel truth. Like, oh, because I have a PhD, therefore you must listen to me because I'm right. Not because I have any experience or that I've actually done this in the crucible of the home.
Or seen what happens long term to somebody if you never tell them no.
And I think that is incredibly irresponsible of these people to be filling these parents and these teachers' heads with this nonsense without any sort of practical application of the very principles they're espousing.
Yeah.
But
it reminds me of recently my daughter in high school came to me and she said, "Mom, there's this guy on YouTube and he teaches his class on developing confidence and it's $600 for his course, but I really think we should get it. I really think."
No, she wanted to get it.
She wanted to get it. And she was about to spend $600 on this guy's course on developing confidence. And she wanted me to help her out. And my husband and I listened to, you know, a blurb of his for a minute or two. And we looked at each other and went, dear.
To be fair, I had actually looked at this guy maybe a year prior, 6 months prior. I was actually familiar with who she was talking about. And I knew this guy was not legit. So, but I went with you, Hannah. We did watch some of his stuff there with my daughter. And
we just said, "Sweetheart."
Just to placate, to show, yes, I know who you're talking about.
He looks like he's 20 years old. And he's claiming that he's going to help you with your whole future and your whole life and your business and everything like this.
Nothing against 20-year-olds. Nothing against 20-year-olds.
You all these tricks. I said, I think it would be better to check out a book by Warren Buffett or somebody who actually
lived,
has a more experience under their belt, who's gone through more difficulties and more challenges.
No offense. This guy has been away from his own home for what, a year and a half? Like,
yeah.
What could he possibly know?
Yeah, and I don't want to go that way really, but the point being,
well, no, you have to check the messenger.
You have to check the messenger and see if they're actually qualified in any sort of way with experience, because there's no substitute for experience.
Yeah, that also reminded me of a professional that I knew, a chiropractor, who had. You went to his office and his office was lined with all these books. It was all the same book. It was his book that he had written. I'm waiting in there in the waiting room. And of course you can't help but open the book and read it. And it was just filled with, like you were saying, Hannah, that thing in the bathroom. It was filled with those types of things, little sayings. They weren't true though. They were just these, like ear ticklers where you're like, oh, that's nice. Or, oh, that makes me feel good or whatever. And it was, the entire book was filled with those. And I'm like, okay, this guy is a chiropractor. He's just started his practice, not married, no kids, has never had anything. Everything in his life has gone perfectly up to that point. What could he possibly know about life. No offense, nice guy, but like he didn't have any sort of real life experience. And here he was telling me how to live my life. And I couldn't help but laugh. The title of the book was humorous as well, but
we're not going to share that.
Not going to share that. Anyway, so that's number one. Look at, of the 4 principles when it comes to determining if something is BS, the first principle is to look at the person who's giving the advice to determine if they're even qualified. And we would put...
if they've even tried their own advice.
Right. And we suggest that experience trumps a PhD or a theory any day. So that's number one. Number 2, and this is the funny one, we suggest that you take the advice to the extreme. And what do we mean by that? Okay, so if somebody, and I remember this goes back to my physics teacher actually, who said, hey, one time someone told me that it takes 1 degree of heat to heat any amount of water 1 degree. And it was something like that, some physics equation. And he's like, okay, well, let's take that and see if that's true. It only takes, it was like 1 degree of heat for 1 minute to heat 1 millimeter of water. He's like, okay, let's just take that to the logical extreme. Let's say if we had the ocean. It's only 1 millimeter thick, but if we added, you put the whole ocean underneath this little flame for 1 minute, is it gonna boil? Is it gonna heat up? He's like, no way. There's no possible way that could. He took he had taken this person's statement to a logical extreme, and it totally fell apart. And I've taken that with me throughout my life, and I'm like, oh, that's a good principle. Where if somebody suggests something, and as we were just talking about, where you never tell your child no. Oh, well,
take it to a more extreme situation.
At face value, you're like, oh, okay, I see the value. That makes sense. But let's take it to the logical extreme. Like you said, Hannah, oh, well, the kid's about to jump off the cliff or to jump in the pool and they don't know how to swim or whatever.
Or they're about to run in the street. Or they're going to test out drugs.
Yeah,
or
you take it to a logical extreme, you're like, that makes no sense. Why? No, that is total hogwash. And so it quickly becomes very clear that the advice or the saying is BS.
Yeah, as opposed to it being a true principle that you should apply in your life and throughout your life. And so you can discard it and go, you know what? No, this is not a correct principle.
But if it does hold up under those sort of circumstances here's an example, always love your children. You're like, oh, well, okay, yeah, I think so. Well, yeah, well, what if they're a murderer and they're convicted and they're in prison? Yeah, you should still love them. So there you go. You can take that to a logical extreme. If it holds up, then it's a true principle. See how that works? It's kind of cool. Taking the saying to a logical extreme. That's number 2. The number 3 principle when it comes to detecting nonsense is to ask, is whatever the saying or the advice is it doable with more than 1 or 2 children? Because, and we hear this a lot, oh, when you have such and such a problem, all you do is blah, blah, blah. You're like, oh, well, oh, that's great. Okay, good, thanks. It turns out that they only had 2 children, and they were both boys, and they're about the same age. It's like, and they had roughly the same personality. It's like, oh, okay, so that worked for those 2 boys, therefore it's universal? No, lady, we tried that principle, and that it's true. It worked for our first 3 children,
or kids in that age group, or it's
or for kids of that gender. Like, oh, that applies to boys, but turns out it doesn't work at all for girls. Or it only works for boys ages 8 to 12, or it only works for boys from rich families, or it only works for whatever it is. Where it's like, that wouldn't be a true principle because you can't apply it universally. And so if it doesn't apply to more than your 1 or 2 children, probably need to discard it. It may be a neat trick or a tip for one of those children, but it's not a correct principle.
Or it may be an overcomplication. So back to the scout leader, where he was adding in a whole bunch of extra steps and unnecessary things. It may be that it's just something that's not really necessary. And it's just overcomplicating your life if you try to apply it. It may not be harmful, it may not be wrong, but it may be something that's just not necessary.
Now, we here at Money Pants, we're all about, what is it? Oh, that's right, efficiency and making the most of what limited time and resources you have. We don't have time for nonsense. We just don't have time, Hannah, we don't have time. And when I say we, I mean parents in general. We don't have time to be doing things that are not effective. And a lot of this stuff comes from people who don't have kids, or who only have little kids, or have only raised one kid, where they don't have the breadth of knowledge and understanding of, they're overcomplicating it. And like you said, Hannah, if what you're doing makes you think you could never have more than one child, then what you're doing is not practical, and an easier way probably exists. And that's what Money Pants is all about, is making the most, leveraging the limited time and energy that you have to be the most effective.
Focusing on the most important things, and kind of leaving any fluff to the sides, or at least recognizing that it's not necessary. So you're not putting all these requirements on yourself and stressing yourself out needlessly.
Well, no, because we knew a mother who had bought into some nonsense. And one of the things that she had bought in, she had, actually, no offense, but she had a lot of nonsense. But she only had 2 children, and she was dumbfounded that we could have more than 2. I think we had 4 at the time. And she was just dumbfounded that we could be so foolish, because there's no way that we could possibly be good parents if we had more than 2 children. And this was why, is she truly believed that it was her job to be there for her children every waking moment, or anytime during the night. Like her kids, she promised her children that she would always be there for them. And so she would wake up all through the night.
Well, yeah. Because I asked her, I said, well, she's like, I would never have more than 2 children. I can't do it. And I don't see how you can do that. Meaning, I doubt you're a good parent because you have more.
That was the implication.
And so I was like, okay, well, why, like, why is that? Why couldn't you have more than 2 children? And she said, well, it's because I haven't slept in 8 years for more than 1 hour at a time. And I said, what? What's going on? Like, and she goes, well, anytime my children cry, I get up out of bed at night, and I wake up and I get out of bed, and I comfort them, and I talk with them for an hour, and I let them know I am here. I am here, and I'm never going to leave you. And I'm here, and I will talk to them for as long as necessary. And as many times as they wake up in the night, I will be there, and I will let them know I'm there. And she's like, I haven't slept for more than 1 hour straight for the last 8 years. But this is vital. It is vital that my kids have that security and that confidence that their mom will always, always, always be there for them.
But here's the thing.
And I smiled at her and I said, oh, so you're saying when your kids cry at night, you never say things like, stop crying or I'll give you something to cry about. And I was joking, but she got this horrified look on her face, and it was the end of the conversation. And I don't think she ever talked to me again after that.
Yeah, I think so. But here's the problem with that, Hannah. It kind of sounds good, like, oh yeah, always be there for your children. You're like, I get it. That's kind of the underlying principle. But she had taken it to a strange extreme. But what does that teach her children? Well, here's the problem, Hannah, is that they never learn to self-soothe. They never learn to solve their own problems. And they become very reliant on mom emotionally. Like, what's going to happen when they have a relationship of their own? Like they're going to be in their wedding day, and there's mom in the back seat. Okay, well, do you need a hug? Let's talk it out. And it's like, how's that going to work out? Like, mom's always she can't always be there. Or the flip side, what if mom dies? Then what? That poor kid's devastated. Where are they going to go? How are they going to possibly survive? What if mom gets sick? Or like,
what if mom can't be there for them? Because the truth of the matter is, she's not always going to be there for them.
And can't. It's not possible.
And she can't. And she needs to instead be saying, hey, I'm not going to always be there for you. Here's what you need to do.
Yeah, teach them correct
so you
principles.
Can handle this on your own.
Coping mechanisms. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and so I realized after talking to her, I'm like, I have the exact opposite thing. I'm always trying to help my kids become independent of me.
Right.
And be able to do things on their own and let them know, hey, I'm not always going to be here. So you need to know how to do this yourself. And
right, but she was setting up false expectations for her children.
Yeah, we had the complete opposite approaches. But the thing is her thing sounded nice and it sounded responsible, but it was actually not true. And in the long run, that's not helpful.
Right.
And it's going to result in unintended consequences.
Right. So that's a good way to test whether or not something is viable. Is it doable with more than one or two children? And again, with smaller and smaller families, a lot of this advice is directed to people who have one or two children. And you're like, oh, okay, that makes sense. I buy that. But unfortunately, it's not a correct principle.
Yeah, and but in my own life, I've had to apply this as far as when I had my third child was born, which I no longer had just two children. My husband and I were outnumbered. I remember just kind of having a breakdown and going, I can't do this. I can't do this. This is too hard. Mm-hmm. And I realized what I was saying was too hard is I wasn't able to clean the whole house by myself.
And cook the meal.
And do all the stuff. And
help with the homework.
It was too much. And then I realized that this expectation that I put on myself that I should be able to do that, and that was what my job was actually wrong.
It was false. It was a false expectation.
That everybody in the family needed to learn to help out and do their part.
But not only did they need to, it would be healthy and helpful for them too.
Yes, and so that was like a turning point for myself where realizing that things that I believed in or thought that it was my responsibility or my duty as the mother, when I was faced with having 3 children instead of 2, I had to find why I was so overwhelmed and what the thing was that I had adopted that wasn't true.
Yep.
And that was
And
that
you pulled that out of the back of your brain and you applied one of these, little tricks of...
I applied a true principle. And so what happened after that is once you realize that, oh, wait, my job as a mom is not to do all these things, all of a sudden, oh, I could have 4 children, 5 children, 15 children. It doesn't matter how many children I have. I can handle it because I'm not putting this weird expectation on myself that I should be the one to clean the whole house by myself and I should be the one to do
and run the
everything.
home and do the shopping and exactly.
Yeah, and so even if you're not planning on having a huge family, realizing that if you're adopting ideas that don't apply to bigger families, you're probably putting too much onto yourself, and it's actually not good for your children and your family. So
that's number 3. Check. The principle number 3 is check to see if whatever the saying is doable with more than 1 or 2 children. And then the last one, number 4, is you need to ask yourself, can you apply this idea in a practical setting? Where if you can't, then it's just going to be a waste of time. Did you have an example?
I picked up a book of it's a parenting book. Somehow ended up in my house. Somebody gave it to me, and
now, Hannah, just so you know, parenting is a bad word.
Yes,
we are not parenting experts. We are efficiency experts. And we are not parenting. We can
help you reach your goals, but we're not parenting experts.
Not only that, Money Pants is not a parenting program. It's not designed to replace parents. It's supposed to complement whatever it is you're currently doing.
It's to help you carry out whatever it is you want to do. It's not to tell you what you should be doing or how to parent.
It's not a parenting system.
This is not a parenting system. Do not take parenting advice from us. That's not what we're about.
But there are plenty of parenting books and parenting blogs and parenting advice which we do not subscribe.
Yeah, and some we do. Some parenting things we like, but that's your own personal choice. But I'm just saying, a random book ended up in my house, and when I opened it, some of the little sayings and little snippet. It's a book of snippets of advice of how to be a parent. And so it's scrolling through it. Some of it was good, where I'm like, oh, okay, that's a good point. That's a good thing. But other things, you have to kind of keep your eyes out and go, hey, is this actually true? Let's see.
Well, okay. So for this last little bit, this is the last part of the podcast here. We're going to break down. We're actually going to use these 4 principles that we talked about. Looking at the person who's giving the advice and see if they're qualified. Number 2, take things to a logical extreme. Take whatever they're saying to a logical extreme. See if it holds up. Number 3, determine if it's even doable if you have more than 1 or 2 children. And number 4, is it applicable in a practical setting? And so we actually have this little book that showed up in our house that was filled with just, I don't know, hundreds of little sayings and things that
a parent should do, or a parent should
things
know.
Things to do as a parent. And so we're going to break these down, and we're going to apply these principles that we talked about, these 4 principles, and see how the principles in this book or these sayings hold up.
Okay,
so
well,
go ahead.
First off, we looked up the author, and the author does have a PhD or a degree
in marriage, family therapy, whatever it is, MFT, whatever it is.
Yeah, and that's all the information we could find on the author.
So we don't know if he has children, and if he does have children, whether or not they turned out okay. Like, you don't know. Now, granted, I'm going to put the plug in here, just because you can't necessarily look at how a person's children turn out to determine whether or not they were a good parent.
Yeah, so it's a little more complicated, but
the fact that he, we don't know if he has kids. See, that's a big thing, where if somebody's going to give you advice on how to raise your kids or to run your home, they sure as heck better have had children of their own and raised them all the way.
I would assume he had kids, but it's not explicit in the book.
Well,
at
the
any
chiropractor
point.
friend of mine who wasn't even in a relationship, let alone married or had kids, his book was filled with all this relationship advice and life advice and parenting
what parents
advice.
Should do. And
like,
so
well, that's the neat thing about.
You would assume that they had children, but at no point in this book does it say that he does. And
but that's the neat thing, though, is everyone knows how to raise your kids.
Yeah. Anyway, so
let's go. Let's do this thing.
Okay.
What do you got?
So one saying was, loving your children doesn't mean that you do everything for them. Let them do for themselves those tasks that they can.
Oh,
that's fantastic
I like that.
advice.
Yeah, good.
Yeah, that's really great.
Well, no, because if you take that to the extreme, a logical extreme, well, don't do everything.
Yeah,
okay.
It doesn't. Yeah, don't do everything. Let them do the things that they're able to.
Okay, so it passes that test.
Yeah, great.
And is it doable with more than 1 or 2 children? Yep.
Yeah, absolutely.
And can you apply that in a practical setting? Absolutely.
Okay.
Great. That passes. Good.
Here's another one. Remember that with children, what they don't talk about with you may be acted out instead.
Okay.
I'm not sure I know what the point of this is.
Hannah, that sounds like gobbledygook to me.
So I don't talk about murder with my son, so he might act it out. Well, we better start talking about murder.
and how to murder. Like what?
All the ways you can murder, because if we don't talk about it, he might do it.
Unfortunately, that principle, or that idea has made its way into schools. Like, we need to talk about everything nasty and horrible with the children so they don't do it.
And it's like,
this is a bunch of nonsense.
Actually, I think if I
there's actually a phrase.
I actually think if I talked about murder and all the ways you can murder someone with my kids, it would actually give them ideas.
Knowledge of the vice leads to its
tempteth to its commission, or something like that.
Yeah,
I actually think that's wrong.
I butchered that phrase, but that's the idea. Is knowledge of something actually leads to its commission.
Yeah. So I'm gonna say that's a bunch of gobbledygook right there.
Didn't even pass the second test.
All right, so let's move on. The 4 R's of family unity are rules, relationships, rituals, and roots.
Brought to you by the letter R.
I don't know.
Okay, this is so vague and nonsensical. Like maybe if there was like some exposition or explanation of what rules, relationships, rituals, and roots are. But I'm thinking, okay, well, we have 3 rules. Mom and I have a relationship. Our ritual is dinner time, and we have 3 trees in the living room. Is that what we're talking about?
No, we have parents and traditions and
the roots.
Yeah, I'm not sure. but I'm not even sure how to apply that.
So
Here's the next one. Rule number 19. Only discouraged children misbehave. So apparently all parents need to know that only discouraged children misbehave. So the next time
if I had known that.
So the next time your child, gets caught with their hand in the cookie jar, you better know that they are very discouraged. And that's probably why they're reaching for a cookie.
What the heck?
But
only discouraged children misbehave.
Discouraged.
Oh, because what does that imply, Hannah? It implies that you, the parent, have done a bad job encouraging them, and you need to be more encouraging because it's your fault that they're misbehaving.
Yeah, and it goes back all onto you.
Oh,
only
what a bunch
discouraged children misbehave.
That's just blatantly false.
Okay.
It doesn't even pass the smell test.
Okay, here's the next one. Self-discipline is the best discipline.
Oh, I like that. That sounds good.
That sounds
Yeah.
good. Self-discipline is the best
discipline.
discipline. Okay, wait. Discipline is when you tell somebody, hey, there's a consequence for your actions.
Right.
Okay, so are they saying that you shouldn't discipline? Or, wait a minute,
yeah, I guess
do toddlers have self-discipline?
Forget toddlers. How about
6-year-olds have
8-year-olds, 12-year-olds?
Self-discipline? Does this actually apply to everything?
Okay, yeah, it kind of falls apart, doesn't it? Where it's like self-discipline. Okay, maybe it is the best discipline, but I think that applies like for adults. Like 6-year-olds are not known for their self-discipline.
It's kind of a process you develop, and that's how you become an adult.
But here's the problem, Hannah. Can you apply that in a practical setting?
Yeah, how are you going to apply that?
So we're just
going to stop disciplining and just let your kid do whatever they want and say, well, it's self-discipline?
So it doesn't pass rule number 4 or test number 4 of
see how that turns out. You'll get in trouble if you do that, I believe.
4 tests.
Yeah. Well, my kid wants to stay up till 4 a.m. I'm not going to discipline them. It's all up to them. Self-discipline.
Yeah. Sorry.
So
that one falls apart.
Okay.
It sounds good though. It sounds really good.
I'm actually not sure what that means, or if that's what they were going for.
Well, that's what we're talking about when we talk about ear tickling, where it's like, oh, that sounds good.
That sounds good.
Initially, like, ooh, I like that.
And maybe it just needed more explanation of what they meant by this and where it's going, but that's all I've got. That's all the book says.
Yeah, that's it.
But instead of putting that on my back of, oh, this is something I got to remember, I'm going to go ahead and discard it because
don't need it.
I don't know how to apply that or what that even means.
All right, next one.
Next one, even if they fail, encourage children to try new things. Even if they fail to do something to their own or others' expectations, their efforts can be praised as well as their willingness to try.
We actually believe that.
Yeah.
That's correct.
That's good. So if your kid fails, you can still praise their effort, that they tried something and... Yeah.
Well, let's say, logical extreme. Let's do the test number 2. Take this to a logical extreme. If they come home with they come last in the race. There you go. They're last place, but they ran their heart out to the very end. Can you compliment them?
Yeah.
Yeah, you can actually be very proud of them. Can you be what if they come in first place? Can you still extol their effort?
Yeah.
Absolutely. So as long as they're trying and they did their best, it doesn't matter what place they come in.
Yeah, their willingness to try and their effort. You can
So test number 3, is that doable with more than 1 or 2 children? Yeah. And can you apply it in a practical setting? Yeah. Okay, so that one passes. That one's a good one.
Okay. And I'm not going to go through the whole book, but here's the next one. Here's the next piece of advice. If you cannot explain a decision to your child, rethink the decision.
What? Sorry, what? If you cannot explain a decision to your child, rethink the decision. What? Put on your car seat. Okay, so there was this guy named Newton, and I'm going to explain to you
the first law of thermodynamics. No, what is it? No.
Newton's
what is it?
law of motion.
Motion. Okay, so little Johnny, an object that's in motion stays in motion unless it's acted on by another force.
But we also need to explain inertia.
Yes, so you've got to wear that seatbelt
and mass. I'm like, what the heck? 2-year-old's like, huh? Well, you know what? I can't explain it to my 2-year-old, so maybe I need to
rethink this.
I need to rethink the whole seatbelt thing. He shouldn't have to wear it.
I can't explain it to him.
Okay, so that one doesn't that one doesn't pass.
And maybe that's not what the author meant, but
that's the
what
problem.
Do they mean?
Well, no. Okay,
like,
here's the deal.
Okay.
But in order for it to be a correct principle, it has to stand on its own, and that does not.
How many times has it happened where with our teenagers, we have said, you know what? One time, my daughter was going to get a job somewhere, and I said to her, you know what? I don't have a good reason for this, but I just have a very uneasy feeling. Really proud of her for applying for the job, getting the job, and getting the job offer. And I said to her, I am so proud of you for getting this job, and that's what we were working for. I've been driving you around to different places to, turn in your applications, and you finally got this job offer, and it's great. We know other kids who work here. And I have a bad feeling about it. I can't shake it. I can't explain it. Other than every time I think about it, I feel sick to my stomach. And I'd like you to turn down this job. And I don't know why. But for some reason, I feel uncomfortable and I can't explain it. I would still want her to turn down that job because I've learned that when I get that uncomfortable feeling, that I better listen. Because for me, that's God telling me there's something wrong here. You don't know about it, but there's something not right.
Trust me.
And
just
trust me.
Yep.
You need to listen to it. Sometimes I need my kids to trust me, even if I don't have a fabulous explanation for it. So I'm going to have to say, if you can't explain a decision to your child, rethink the decision. I'm going to disagree with that because of experiences that I've had where I haven't been able to explain. Actually, one time that happened to me when I was a teenager. I was planning on going and visiting my cousins in California. I lived in Florida, and I was looking forward to it. They had invited me, and when I asked my mom to buy the plane tickets, which she had said she would the year before, she said, I don't feel comfortable. I don't know why. And I harassed my mom. I pouted. I tried manipulating her. And she says, I am so sorry, but I just feel sick about you going there. And so finally, I decided I would respect my mom and accept her decision. And later that summer, a horrible, very traumatic crisis happened in my cousin's home that summer. They lost their mom. It was
the very summer you were going to be there.
Yeah. She was having mental health issues, and it was a really bad, very stressful, very traumatic situation. Nobody had expected, and all of it happened right when I would have been visiting them and staying at their house. And so take that lesson from my mom of, hey, you're not always going to be able to explain your decisions.
Now, on the flip side, if you can, it's best, but this is not a universal truth. You can't take this doesn't pass the test of whether or not you can take it to a logical extreme. The idea is, if you can't explain a decision to your child, rethink the decision. That's not always true. As you said, Hannah, your mom couldn't explain a decision, but it was the right one. And as parents, a lot of times we have to go with our guts, and we don't know why. We get a weird vibe or whatever, and we just have to go with it. And we can't always explain our decisions. Yeah,
and I've learned when you get that uncomfortable feeling in your gut, you as a parent, you need to listen to it.
Yeah.
If you're like,
and every time we don't, we regret it.
Every single time I have not listened to that, I have regretted it. Anyway, but that's like I said, it's this little book, and there were some true things in it, and then there were some untrue things in it. But you can kind of use the 4 principles that we told you about to kind of filter through some of those things. So as a parent, you're not loading on either false information or you're not making your job harder. And so one of the things about Money Pants is our goal is to make things as practical as possible, as applicable as possible. And we try to draw on both our successes and our failures and just share with you why we've come to the conclusion we've come to. But you don't want to let fluffy parenting advice interfere with your success as a parent or your success in using money pants. And so, because sometimes these fluffy parenting advice things directly contradict with
correct principles.
Like you should never, I've heard people say you should never have your child work. That's wrong.
You should never pay your children.
You should never pay your children. That's wrong.
You shouldn't dictate their bedtime.
Yeah. And so some of those fluffy parenting things will get in the way of implementing money pants. And so what we're saying is, hey, you can kind of cut through the fluff and make things easier on yourself by just kind of using these four little techniques to filter.
Four tests. I'm going to call them tests.
Yeah, and just repeat them one more time.
4 tests for detecting nonsense. Number 1, look at the person who's giving the advice and find out if they're even qualified.
Yeah, and if they've had any experience.
Yeah. And experience,
if they've tested out their own theories.
And experience is king.
Experience
trumps PhDs.
You have to do the experiment. You have to test out your theories.
Number 2, take things to a logical extreme. Number 3, test whether or not this saying or idea is doable with more than 1 or 2 children, more than 1 or 2 personalities, more than just one gender. And then number 4, ask yourself, can you apply this idea in a practical setting? If not, it's probably just not something that's of value. And if whatever it is, if whatever saying or idea doesn't pass those 4 tests, you can safely go, you know what? I don't need that. It's unnecessary. And you can move on because there are so many other correct principles that you don't need to take up room in your brain with these nonsense ideas and these bologna sandwiches, when there are so many correct principles waiting to take up that space instead. So that's kind of it. Those are all of our thoughts on how to detect nonsense and how to apply practical help versus falling victim to fluffy advice. If you like what you hear in this podcast, please tell your friends. They may want to listen too. And if you have a suggestion for a future podcast, go to our website under support and click Contact Us. Send us an email and we'll get right on it. And that's it for today. Enjoy, once again, our mystery guest composition. We'll see you next time.
Oh, yeah. You know what time it is?
What time is it?
It's time for the Superpower Hour.
Ooh, that sounds fun.
Money Pants.
What's that?
Oh, yeah.
Tell me about it.
Money Pants.
Come
Will
on.
ignite greatness in you.
In me?
Unlock your superpowers.
Ooh, I have
With
superpowers?
Money Pants.
How do I do that?
Cash.
Ooh, I like that.
Money.
Ooh, even better. Tell me more.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about now.
Talk about
Cash.
what? Cash?
Money.
Yeah, money. I like money.
It's time for you.
Oh, yeah, I'm so excited.
Money Pants.
Yeah, give me some money pants.
Oh yeah, money pants.
I want money pants.
Every day. All I want is more money pants.
Me too.
Money pants.